Welcome to an episode of InRange. We're here to talk to you today about options in regard to LPVO and red dot mounting, specifically products from Reptilia, which we'll get to in a moment. You know, we hear that the AR-15 is the most common rifle in the United States. And I think maybe you account for 75% of those statistics.
That's quite possible. I am what the media would define as a super user.
we got three on the table right now. We have to put a couple of the way because we couldn't fit them all.
Right.
Yeah. So tell me what's going on here. We got optics mounts from Reptilia, all three of them, yes?
Correct.
But they provide different mechanisms in terms of, one is just LPVO, one is stacked red dot on top, which I think of that as old GWAT, frankly. Like we still own the ACOG and all that, right?
Right.
And then here we got angled, which is specifically designed for someone who's shooting off their, well, I guess you could use it right or left shoulder. So, well, tell me what's going on.
Right. So Reptilia sent me a couple of their 1.93 height AUS mounts.
That sounds high.
Yeah, I wasn't really...
Actually, it is.
I wasn't really sold on the 1.93 until I started using it, and then I understood why people like it.
Okay.
A traditional AR-15 optic mount is usually 1.5 to 1.57. There are some mid-height mounts around 1.7 inches. And then, of course, now there's all sorts of like skyscraper mounts for night vision use.
Yep.
But 1.93 has actually been around for a while, and my understanding it was developed at the request of Special Forces operators to give them a more heads-up shooting position and stance.
I can't help but sort of laugh internally about this because for those of you that are younger than us, you go back a couple decades, and there was this argument about Soviet scope mounts and how Soviet mounts were really high. And it's like, the Soviets don't know what they're doing. They don't get a cheek well. They can't shoot accurately. These Russian gun designs with the optic that high is stupid. And now, a decade and a half or 2 decades later, we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, you do still get a cheek weld with these.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have a cheek weld to use LPVOs effectively.
Yeah.
But what I noticed using it was two things. It put less strain on my jaw.
Okay.
And I actually have TMJ, which is sometimes painful running in my jaw if I have to really push down on a stock to get behind the optic. The other thing I noticed...
Hold on, the black helicopters are surveilling us. They do this all the time.
Especially when we're filming.
I guess they got what they wanted.
Yes.
All right, so you're saying it's better on your cheek
yes.
and your jaw
yes.
for more to be okay.
The other thing I noticed too is that wearing corrective lenses, it allows me to have more of the center of my lens directly behind the center of the scope more easily.
That's interesting.
Versus if it's lower, I end up looking out more of the top of my lens versus the center of the lens. And basically what it's allowing me to do is to be more consistent in my head placement regardless of the particular shooting position I need to use, and have less parallax or stacking of perception issues when I'm wearing corrective lenses trying to get in the eye box of an LVPO.
And this could also apply, maybe higher than this, although this is high enough probably to look through it in a passive mode with night vision.
Yeah, certainly something you could try.
That said, passive night vision is more of a fantasy than a reality in the real world. It's more of a square range trick.
Right.
Boy, we're going to get some comments on that. At any rate, but we do see optics in general getting higher or taller off bore.
And I think for me, like, because I've used the super tall ones and I've used the lower ones, the 1.93 is kind of the sweet spot for usability and comfort.
Okay.
Another interesting thing that I found was that running my ballistics charts with the different bore offset is it turns a 50/225 0 into more of like a 50/275 0. So it gives me more of a better point blank zero out to that distance where I don't have to hold over.
Yeah, that sounds like an advantage to me. Like, it just keeps you flatter out to, say, 300.
Right.
Okay.
And at 300, like with a 20-inch barrel, it's like about 3 inches a drop.
Yep.
So it's like you don't need to hold over on
for almost all purposes. It's irrelevant.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so I've enjoyed using them. I tend to prefer the offset versus the stacked.
So off to the side, so you angle the gun when you want the red dot?
And this is the thing is, like, over time, everything we're doing with AR-15s keeps getting more and more refined.
Yes.
And before, I'd have to have like a separate offset mount behind the optic or in front on the handguard rail. And the way these mounts are made is they have these ports on either side, so you can actually put them facing either way, at the rear or at the front. It's a very streamlined solution to running an offset red dot, and it puts it at the same plane as you just rotate it, so you don't have to put your head up or
Yeah,
down.
you
You're
just literally cant the gun a little bit.
just canting it. Um, of course, the downside of having stuff offset is hanging off the gun is a snag hazard. It's a little bit less convenient for storing in cases, but from a use perspective in the match environment, I generally find it to be faster. The problem I've had using the stacked one, which it's more streamlined, you can use it off either shoulder, is you need to really practice like popping your head up and getting in the right spot to see through the dot.
So finding the dots.
Yes.
Unlike
But
this where you just turn it, you have to go for a little bit and then find it.
yes.
Okay.
So it's less instinctual and would require more practice to do that consistently. Um, that said, though, one of the things it can help you with is if you're zoomed in
Mm-hmm.
and you want to figure out like the area you're actually looking at, you can kind of bracket it in your dot, then go down onto your scope.
I know the targets between those two saguaros, but in my LPVO, I'm not quite there. So if
Right.
you bring it up and you look at the dot and you bring the dot between the saguaros
Mhm.
and you come down and don't move the gun, you're going to be in the same place.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and I do zero them at the same distance
Yeah.
regardless. So like if I do need to use this as a primary optic, it can be used. They're both zeroed at 50 yards for me.
I do love how this is now the convergence of, I love this phrase, think for a moment that you might be wrong.
Mhm.
And I brought up like 10, 15, 20 years ago, the high optics that we saw in Russian guns was wrong and no one wanted it. It was stupid. And now we're doing that. But at the same time, back then, same time frame, if you were to put a 45-degree angle red dot on your gun, you were just one of those damn gamers. But here we have an optic that's kind of Russian height with an offset 45-degree red dot from the gamers requested by special forces operators. What does that tell us?
Well, everything feeds on each other and
Yeah.
improves things over time,
It
right?
just tells us that if you're super sure about something without doing it yourself, you may not know what you're talking about.
And to be fair, I think the lack of the elegance of the AK mounts was that they had a drop stock.
Yeah.
So that you were hovering completely above it, where with these you do have an index point, you do solidly get behind the optic.
And they weren't always bore centric. They might have
No.
been offset to the left, which
Right.
meant you not only had elevation but windage issues. But a lot of people, you remember people saying that the height was stupid.
Right.
Okay. And you remember people saying that 45-degree red dots was gamer shit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we're on the same page.
Yep.
Yeah.
So everything gets a little bit better over time. It's nice having more streamlined solutions that you don't have to kind of hodgepodge things together. Like even a rifle I put together just a couple years ago. I have an offset mount that's taking up this rail space further back here. And what does it do for me is it blocks the charging handle a little bit. It's a little bit less convenient to use the charging handle. So by having all this stuff integrated into one mount here, you're not using up all the rail space. And if you want to, you can have your backup iron sight and also keep your charging handle clear of having something mounted back here.
And this is where it's so interesting to me, because the people that make fun of this shouldn't, and I think that's the point of what I'm going with here, is that it's that gamer shit that elevates the technology forward.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's Mark 262 becoming the squad designated marksman round, at least for part of the GWAT, or 45-degree offset red dots, it's best to tune and enhance and refine your weapons craft in a place where you're not necessarily taking incoming rounds. And that's what these games do.
Yeah.
And so the AR-15 becoming what it has become and continues to evolve is partially because of real-world use, but very much because of the recreational sport use, which is now turning this into a really an elegant firearm that it would have never been able to be if it wasn't for that mechanism of progress.
Absolutely. One other just nice quality of life feature I want to point out on these mounts is they are hard engraved with the torque specs for both the rings
Oh, nice.
and the mounting screws.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to go like look that up in a manual. It's just there. And it's also nice. Just one thing I want to point out is kind of in conjunction with the SIG optics. SIG is engraving the sides of their optics with a leveling line.
I really like that. I have two of those, and I really like that.
So like all these things together mean that if you don't have like a scope level, you don't have all the like normal stuff that to like perfectly balance it, it's way easier to set these things up as an end user than it ever was before.
So you don't just blob some red Loctite and then just crank with a screwdriver as hard as you can?
Yeah, just go till you feel
and
that
then
aluminum.
And just keep going? Maybe a little more?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. I mean, that is how it was done in the day.
Right.
Not the best way. Again, evolving and progressing the technology.
I've heard from scope manufacturers like one of the major reasons for returns is over torquing of rings and damaging the
Yeah, of
bodies
course.
and internal mechanisms.
It needs to be string. It needs to be on strong and tight, but it doesn't need to be on there to the point where it breaks the screws.
Right.
Yeah. So this is actually very interesting. Where do you think this is going from here? Is this kind of it for now?
I don't know how much more you can refine like the mounting systems. I think the next evolution would be scopes themselves having a built-in base that you don't need to level up, like the ACOG and its mount being used on the Trigicon VCOG, which is an LVPO. But
Yeah,
if you're,
yeah.
but I think ring-based scopes are so prolific that they're not going away anytime soon. So like these sorts of mounts are probably going to perpetuate for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what we need to do now is look at what people are making fun of on the internet today and invest in it now so that we can get like Back to the Future rich in about a decade.
Yeah, that seems to be the natural course of things.
Well, this is very interesting. And the only way you can come to these conclusions is based on using it, and that's what you do.
Yep.
And that's why you're the perfect resource to talk about these things. Quite
Yeah,
honestly.
and this is why you need 30 different AR-15s. So you can try out every different scope mount configuration.
Yeah, I don't know. I just use lever guns and I just beat the buckhorn sight with a rock until it goes, it hits about right. And that works great for me. Well, but it's not going to do the same thing at all. Anyways, guys, if you like this kind of stuff, this is the stuff you're going to find on channels like this, which I think is the only one like it. So if you like this, consider supporting us. 10 years into this, completely intentionally demonetized, supported by viewers like you. Every dollar counts. Patreon.com/InRangeTV. So we can do stuff like this that isn't going to get prioritized by the YouTube algorithm. When you say we're going to discuss the advantages of 45-degree versus stacked red dot sights, that doesn't seem to hit like the recommend page.
No, it doesn't.
Weird. Anyways, consider supporting us. Patreon.com/InRangeTV. Click subscribe, hit the bell, but more importantly, share with your friends so that people see this, because otherwise they may not find it when they're only looking at that homepage. Stay tuned for more.